I talked to you, you were just getting ready to start off. Yes. Like it's literally not.
Yeah, but it's. Good morning, everyone. This VRE Operations Board meeting will now come to order. Please lead us in the pledge of allegiance. Please stand. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please call the roll.
Mr. Alcorn? Ms. Bailey? Here. Mr. Alcorn?
Here.
What's your name? Mr. Banks? Ms. Bennett Parker?
Here.
Ms. Blumkey? Ms. Crystal? Here. Ms. Franklin?
Here.
Mr. Kelly?
Here.
Ms. Lamb? Here. Ms. Lawson? Here. Mitchell? Here. Dr. Frazier? Here. Mr. Smith? Mr. Stork?
Here.
Mr. Walkinshaw?
Here.
Madam Chair, we have a physical forum.
So nice to see everyone in person. In accordance with our newly adopted electronic participation policy, Mr. Stork has requested approval to participate as a voting member electronically. A quorum is physically assembled, and the reason for Mr. Stork's request is that he is out of town, and that will be recorded in the minutes. However, we do need to vote to approve his participation electronically. So is there a motion and a second to approve this? So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Now I'll turn it over to Mr. Dalton for a safety briefing.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and great to see everybody. Just want to, as we assemble in person, and as a point of emphasis, always before we begin any meetings and stuff at VRE, just want to take a moment to highlight some safety things. A lot of us haven't been in this room in a while. Some of us have never been in this room. So let me just point out a couple of things. In the event that we need to evacuate this space, there are two evacuation routes. One out that door, and then look up, there's an exit sign. To the right, there'll be a door and a stairwell that'll get you out of the space. Also, another evacuation route is going to be back through the double doors that you came in. And the door to the right of the elevator. Again, if we're evacuating, do not take the elevator, take the stairwell. And so that'll evacuate us out of there. Also, if we have an incident or an issue in this room, we do have staff assigned to certain responsibilities. So Robert Hostelka in the back, he will be our primary 911 caller. Alex Sugatan in the back will be our backup 911 caller. So if we need to get first responders in this room, that's how we'll take care of that. First aid and CPR, again, attached on the wall adjacent to the elevator out there. And we, just by show of hands, AED, CPR, certified, qualified. Okay, so we do have a handful of, and generally all of VRE staff are qualified. So just wanted to point that out. And then finally, technically we're in a transit facility, and this transit facility is still governed under federal mask mandates. And so as we enter and exit into the facility, as we sit in here, feel free to, to wear your masks. And then also if if you're speaking, eating, drinking, and you don't want to have your mask on, or otherwise just don't have your mask on, that's okay as well, as long as everybody's comfortable with it. Just wanted to point that out. We are still technically in a facility. So that is my safety moment, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dalton. Our next item is the approval of the agenda. Is there a motion and a second to approve the agenda?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Second. Thank you. All those in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. Next, we have the minutes. Does anyone have any corrections to the minutes? Is there a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
So moved, Shelton.
Thank you, Ms. Lamb.
Second.
All those in favor of approving the minutes of the June 25th board meeting, please say aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? So nice to see everyone in person. It's been quite a while since we've been back in this room. The room, I think, has changed a little bit for those of us who've been in it before, but it's nice to see everyone's smiling faces. As a reminder, we are streaming the meeting live on YouTube, and there are mics throughout the conference room, so please keep any side conversations to a minimum. I'd also like to welcome Dr. Fraser, supervisor, who's the alternate for Spotsylvania County. Dr. Fraser is joining us for the first time, and please join me in welcoming her. I'm excited to have her here. Staff also recently submitted our FY21 RAISE grant application to the US DOT for planning and design of the L'Enfant Station and Fourth Track project. I want to thank Senators Warner and Kane, along with Representatives Byer, Connolly, Wexton, and Whitman, and Delegate Holmes Norton for sending letters of support for that application. And then thank you all for your patience in getting a little late start this morning. We had a CEO evaluation committee meeting this morning, and obviously with that, and then also some traffic on 95, we just got to a late start, so appreciate everyone's patience. Following the ops board meeting, there will be a legislative committee meeting in this room. Ms. Franklin is the chair of that committee, and the other members are Mr. Alcorn, Ms. Bailey, Mr. Smith, Ms. Lamb, and Mr. Walkinshaw, but of course, all members are welcome to attend. And of course, we will not be meeting in August, so we will see you next on September 17th. I'll turn it over to Mr. Dalton for his report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let's start with just a safety update. I did want to draw attention to the fact that, and this has been probably a couple of years since we've talked about this, but in 2016, the FRA published a final rule that required commuter and intercity passenger rail operations to develop and implement a system safety program. That over the last 5 years, that program or the final enactment of that program has been stayed several times. And so most recently, the requirement had us submitting our system safety program plan to the FRA in March of this year, which we did. And we recently received some comments back on that plan. And we're going to make some changes and some edits to our plan and resubmit that to the FRA by the end of this month. I do want to point out, as said before, the VRE has operated under a system safety program for a decade plus, prior to even a regulation being, or a regulation requiring the program. And of course, we used industry best practices, lessons learned as the guidance, if you will, to have that program. So this really wasn't a heavy lift for us, but it is a regulatory requirement. And once we get a final approval from FRA, we have like 3 years to fully implement the program. So I will be periodically coming back to you and reporting on that implementation. And a lot of the implementation for us is simply enhancements of our existing programs and training and stuff like that. So again, just wanted to highlight that. It's a significant milestone for us and something that we'll be tracking moving forward. From a ridership standpoint for the month of June, as you can see, exponentially different than the month of May. And of course, starting June 1st, we did go back to a full service, and accordingly, our average daily ridership increased as well. And we still see that continuing to tick up. And as talked about previously, as the summer months moved on, we anticipate seeing an increase in ridership. Still a lot of indications out there that post Labor Day will be yet another big jump. So on-time performance, as reported in May, and reported earlier in the month at the commission meetings, well, or below our target of 90%. We seem to be sort of hitting this trough right now of about 80% system-wide. I want to break that down for you here just a little bit. But as I showed during the last meeting, one of our objective, of course, is to keep that trend line somewhat constant. So we're not going through these seasonal fluctuations, I'll call them, and to ensure that our riders have some predictability with our service. But similar to last month, I showed you some comparison, and not to go back to May too much, but May was, it was the tale of two months there. The first part of the month, the first 10 service days, everything was working just fine. The last 2 months, or the last 10 service days, is where we really started to see a decrease, and due to a lot of different reasons. And of course, that just seemed to have carried through the month of June. This graph here, kind of break it down and sort of focus a little bit on that very right column. Well, first of all, backing up, if you just kind of look, as I mentioned before, what we were seeing, at least that last 2 weeks of May, and then the first couple of weeks, or even the month of June, and just a lot of different random things. And so where we're at right now essentially is we're still seeing a lot of congestion out there. Keep in mind, VRE came back to a full schedule. Amtrak has come back, and not just in our territory, but Amtrak's come back with a full schedule in the Northeast corridor, which has affected a lot of our train movements, not so much in the AM, but in the PM coming out of Washington Union Terminal. So a lot of the congestion number that you see in the far right column is captured in there. The second big topic there is signal issues. The second full week of June and the fourth full week of June saw a lot of signal issues at Washington Union Terminal. And I can get into some of the details there, but those, for the most part, those have appeared to have been resolved here. And some of it was coupled to the weather, and more specifically, if you're familiar with the first Street Tunnel up there, it's an aged infrastructure. It's always a challenge to keep the drainage, the drainage moving freely, if you will, in that tunnel. And we've talked about with Amtrak over the last couple of years of standing up a more advanced program in that tunnel to essentially just stop short of rehabilitating it, but really get in there and address the drainage, the ventilation, the signal system. And of course, from a capacity standpoint, we would like to get a little bit more throughput through that system. So rest assured, those conversations have advanced now, unfortunately, a little bit after the fact, but so I'll be bringing some information back to you there. Again, we continue to meet daily with all of our host railroads. These issues have obviously been elevated to senior management, and we just simply keep pecking away at them. And with the hope that this will stabilize over the next next month or so. So when we come back and riders do come back, this is all behind us. So. Any questions before I move on here?
Thank you so much. So thanks, Mr. Dalton. That's great. I could really visualize the problems with that First Street Tunnel. I wanted to ask, I mean, the NECC has been talking for years, right, about the total rehabilitation of Washington Union Terminal. Is that inclusive of that tunnel, or that would have to be an entirely separate?
It's separate from that tunnel. So I will say the other piece to that, let me jump back. The other piece to that is capacity on that lower level. Okay, and I believe this board, again, going back a couple of years, but we had discussed partnering with Amtrak on what is referred to as resurrecting track 22, okay? And VRE, and I think I've shown some of you when we've done some tours and stuff, I showed you that location. And so that work has begun. What that's going to do is give us another platform, tracks on both sides on that lower level to help, mitigate these congestion type issues. And more importantly, when Northeast Corridor trains that are coming down from Boston, New York, and they're late, and then we all merge there at Washington Union Terminal, and you've got VRE trying to transition to the lower level. You've got MARC trains that are trying to go north, and you've got VRE trains kind of go south. That'll be a huge relief valve for us. They've already started constructing that, and of course, I need to come back to you with an agreement for our share of that construction cost. So I wanted to say that too wasn't part of the rehabilitating the terminal, but they've gone ahead and moved ahead with that. So.
I'm so glad you guys.
Mr. Dalton,
Yes, sir.
the difference from Manassas Line is significant. Without going into the specifics of all, can you confirm that it's not a systemic issue, that it's just one of those reasons that happen?
So contrast the Manassas Line with the Fredericksburg line, and more specifically, the last 2 to 4 weeks. One thing that we've seen on the Manassas Line is particularly at the Manassas station, there are long distance trains on the Amtrak side that start in Chicago, like the Cardinal starts in Chicago. And if it was on time or if it was even an hour late, we would be fine. But when they get into that second hour and third hour window, they're coming right up against us. And Amtrak 19 coming southbound out of the terminal, again, one of those trains that gets caught up in this congestion, and if it's coming out late, so we're getting caught up in that right now. I will say, in addition to all of that, remember when we came back to the full schedule, that wasn't just us operating additional trains, that was also dispatchers on the CSX side, dispatchers on the NS side, and dispatchers on the Amtrak side. They had not dispatched us all, not just VRE, but Amtrak. They have not dispatched us all under this level of service. And coming from experience, there's a human element to this. It's not all automated. And those three entities have to work together. Now, not to say that they're not working together, but they haven't done it in a while, right? And so one thing that we have seen is that harmonization of the dispatching. We have seen that stabilize a little bit. Of course, they've had a lot of practice, unfortunately, to figure out how to stabilize. I mean, anybody can dispatch us under normal conditions, right? It's when you have issues that you really have to, kind of perk up a little bit and strategize. So that we have definitely seen a very positive effect of that. But back on the Manassas side, that was partly the issue over there is the, I'll just say, there was dispatchers sitting on that desk dispatching us that had never dispatched us, let alone at a full schedule.
So it will be addressed.
Absolutely.
Back to the congestion. This has been an issue for the board for a while, and it seems to be trending upward. You mentioned that some track changes will help because you've got a choke point. I guess my first question would be, how much is that going to affect that? Second question would be, up to this point, most of the time we talked congestion, we talked about CSX, not Amtrak. So I'm trying to get a handle on where's the shift, because my concern here is with the state, we're planning on expanding passenger rail. We're talking about expanding commuter rail. Are we going to be able to get a handle on with that expansion and we move forward? Is that track change going to deal with what's coming?
Great question. Let me point a couple of things out there. Again, what we've seen here in the last 4 to 6 weeks, Not so much on the CSX side. If you look at CSX's number, they're at about mid-80s, right? And that largely because our PM trains are coming out of Washington Union Terminal late to them. And they have tried, I have to tell you, they have tried to, position us a little bit different to make up some of that time, but we continue to lose that train. Or we continue to lose trains. The other thing I want to point out, and this is very important here in the near term, is that we just formally kicked off construction of the Quantico Station Improvement Project, which that project also ties together, finishes the tie, if you will, for that 9 miles that was previously the Arkandale to Powell's Creek project. What I'm seeing out there right now, the relief valve that CSX needs in the afternoon is that 9-mile track. So that's going to help us, unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it. It's still 12 to 14 months out, 16 months out till we get there. But hopefully this time next year, or close to this time next year, maybe just slightly past that, we're going to actually see the benefit, at least from that perspective, in addition to the additional capacity it provides, that relief valve, particularly in the PM service as we continue to move further south in the service territory.
So would you consider that a long-term fix? Or when we talk transportation in the Commonwealth of Virginia, we talk about short-term, long-term fixes. Is that, because again, looking at the future expansion and we're all hoping to see on rail, is that deal with that issue?
I'd say that's the shorter term. I mean, because the other planned infrastructure improvements, part of transforming rail in Virginia, I mean, there's, even in this first phase, are some very phenomenal improvements. The Franconia Springfield bypass is going to be huge for the Fredericksburg line trains. And I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead. Do you want to finish?
I was going to say, and of course the Long Bridge is huge. The Long Bridge is a big deal, but the 4th track project, we're likely to see the benefit or some benefits of congestion relief from it sooner once that project starts, phasing itself in as well. So those are, I guess, more longer term if you're looking at it from that time horizon. But yeah, it's frankly, we want to operate more trains, and CSX wants to run more freight trains, but at least there's a path, right?
Well, and also one of the things that's part of our agreements with Amtrak, VRE, and CSX now are these performance committees that we'll be establishing, where we'll actually have, and this is, for CSX and Amtrak to come to the table on this is a big shift in how they've operated in the past. But they'll literally have committees that will be meeting daily to look at train performance and issues like this. What were the reasons for train delays, to start tracking and talking about how to make improvements. And so that, I think, also will be a really big shift in performance. And again, a big part of our agreements was not just about expansion of infrastructure, but also about improving performance. And this was something that again, we really hope is going to make a big difference in improving on-time reliability for everybody. Amtrak, VRE, and CSX's freight as well.
Thank you.
Madam Chair. Yes, thank you. Rich, I'm curious about the police activity. Can you tell us a little bit of
Sure.
why would that cause a delay?
Yeah, let me just go to the June number, the 6 delays there. That was actually two different events, and they both occurred in Alexandria. One event was the railroad got shut down for for an incident that was occurring on an overhead bridge that went over. So those are, when we say police activity, it's that. The other event was an Amtrak train 91 came through, and they noted a suspicious package on the platform. And so to respond to that and to do that safely, the railroad gets shut down.
So they're external to our operation.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes.
I assume that much, but because obviously our writers are very cooperative and lawful.
Every single one of them. Yeah. So to your point, that's why we record it that way, because it is external to.
Thank you.
I just wanted to comment on something my friend said. In terms of the high-level conversations that I've been hearing, that I've been in, just the communication, increased communication is really during the transition of COVID, is making a difference in terms of the level of service and understanding regionally what's important for the next step. So I just wanted to, that's the word on the street, kind of, when I'm sitting in the meeting. So I think that's a hope when you talk about what's going on a big picture standpoint. That's good. I think that's good communication out there. So we appreciate that.
Yeah, just to build on that, as those high level conversations are going on, I don't know if there's any discussion of everybody maybe making some adjustments in terms of schedules, maybe pulling back a little bit to help everybody. But, I, for one, we're at 80%, it's almost getting to the point, we have to scale back just a little bit in certain times. And then we can get agreement from others to do the same, to push that, it's a little bit like OPEC. Sometimes you got to get together and they do that, and so I certainly would encourage us.
I don't know, Richard, if you want to talk at all about the service planning exercise that's done.
I was going to ask Madam Chair if we could just hold that thought,
Okay.
because I'm going to show you something up here that will become a near-term or short-term improvement that will be implemented here in the next couple of months as it relates to schedules and service planning. So not to steal the thunder from that. Okay. On. And thank you for the discussion. This is obviously a very, very important topic to not just this operations board, but the staff as well. My project spotlight this month is the Manassas Park parking garage. Just wanted to give the operations board an update. We're nearing completion of the 60% design level. Targeted to have that done by the end of this month, with final design to be completed by January of 2022. And then hopefully that helps, or that allows us to transition into the procurement activity solicitation process for construction, which we have targeted to begin in April of 2022. And just as a reminder, this is approximately a 740 space parking garage that will have a pedestrian overpass, elevator banks and stuff that will reach over to our existing station platform. And it also provides parking for a retail development there being built adjacent to that. And just hats off to our staff in the city of Manassas Park. We all work together, and this has been it's ebbed and flowed. We've had to, sort of bob and weave a couple of times on this project, but we just continue to push it forward, and very excited to eventually get this project into construction. So.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was gonna save this for board member time, but I'm so prompted by the beautiful flat expanses of the roof of both that parking garage to ask. One of the members of the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority had asked me, and I think it started the conversation with you, Mr. Dalton, about the opportunity for power purchasing agreements, which I think we are empowered under the Code of Virginia as a transit agency to pursue, to start looking at opportunities to put solar facilities on the roofs of a lot of our garages, and indeed some stations that in fact look like this and would be ideal locations for them. I wanted to, surely not in context of this individual project since it's well on its way to final design, but what would be the path if the operations board was interested in pursuing the development or asking staff to pursue the development of a plan to sort of explore some of our existing facilities and scan the market for PPA opportunities?
My reaction to that, and yes, I believe I spoke to the same person that spoke to you. Him and I sat next to each other at the same meeting, but obviously staff in the past, where we have taken any level of analysis, we've actually looked at, station canopies at stations and roofs on our existing fixed facilities. These parking garages, they're not open at the top. They're actually parking spaces, right? So that's one thing, right? The next thing is, and I'm familiar with what they're also doing at just simply at some surface parking lots where they're simply building a structure and putting solar power on the structure, and the benefit is you get to park in the shade, right? So it's we would need to, and I know others are doing this, but specifically Fairfax County, I know Fairfax County, the staff, has been looking at that advanced technology. We would just need to, simply, connect with those county staff, but keep in mind, in most cases, these parking, even surface parking lots or parking garages are owned by the jurisdictions. So it's almost like, particularly at Fairfax County, like at Burke Center, I mean, it's if Fairfax County staff wants to look at that and they need, our assistance or whatever, we're glad to do it with them. But I don't think it would be anything that us as staff or the operations board would hesitate on. Just exploring.
Yeah, just a couple things on that. It's a great thought. I think our experience is extensive power purchasing program. One thing we've kind of learned, I think, is that the economics of the canopies, installing the canopies and putting panels on the canopies doesn't quite pencil out all the time because you get the expense of constructing and permitting and all the parking lots. But it does seem that obviously wouldn't work for this project, but as we move forward with the design of parking garages, to consider in the design phase, at least designing them so that perhaps solar panels would work on a roof at some point. Probably be very difficult to go back in at Burke Center or here and retrofit something on the top floor where people are parking to install panels. But as we're designing the next parking garage, maybe a rolling road at some point in the future, can it be solar ready? Whether we install the panels on day one, or at least make sure that it's ready.
I'm sorry, we're waiting to copy anybody's design.
Obviously, I think this is where you're going. As we have more drivers that actually have electric, this is a great way strategy as well. Potentially.
Madam Chairman, I was bringing this up on the legislative committee side, but I was wondering if we were considering easements for broadband. So in some of the places up north, you don't have an issue, but as you continue further south, like at Brook, Leland Station, and I don't think Spotsylvania has that issue, maybe they can talk. That there's a serious lack of broadband in those areas, both residential side. So providing those easements and that ability to be able to connect, whatever that is for the future, would be awesome. As you well know, or you don't, that Stafford County is hosting the Smart Bed for all the testing for all new technology for Virginia. So we're testing 5G. I don't want to get in that argument right now, but testing those things. But whatever that technology is, I think it would make sense that we're proactive to be able to have an easement or the ability to adapt into that, especially for those places that are underserved.
Any other questions or comments?
Okay, let me wrap this up. I'd like to introduce a new VRE staff member. And so please join me in welcoming Cindy Bullock, who's joined VRE on July 6th as our new Chief Administrative Officer. Cindy will oversee our procurement, human resources, and executive administrative departments. Cindy comes to us from the Virginia Department of Transportation, where she just most recently held the position of Director of Human Resources. In over 15 plus years, and she's had both professional and personal experience in professional experience in the public and the private sector, human resources, contract administration, employment law, policy development, risk management, strategic planning. So I just wanted to ask everybody to join us as a staff, welcoming Cindy today. And then just finally, Madam Chair, I do want to thank Dr. Snyder, and I know he's not here, but I want to thank Dr. Snyder and the right team for championing what you see in this room. While we were out on COVID, the room was renovated. Obviously, we have some new furniture and stuff like that in here. And we're still kind of working our way out, you know, spacing and all that type of stuff. But I do want to thank that team for putting this together. And then just finally, for the VRE staff that are here in the room, and I know several are watching live stream. You know, it's been 12 plus months since we've been able to have a meeting like this, and similar to VRE staff, we're starting to have a lot more face-to-face interactions. And I just want to say, you know, my thanks to the VRE staff. And it's been an incredible year. We've accomplished a lot, and frankly, through some pretty tough times at points. So just there, you know, our staff's can-do spirit and just our ability to just keep chugging along, you know, kind of unintended, just that culture, just, you know, that just permeates throughout our culture. And I really, you know, thank the staff for sort of hanging in there. So the best is yet to come. So that's the end of my report.
Mr. Dalton, and to echo your sentiments, I think the entire operations board is incredibly grateful to the VRE staff and all that you've done. The next item is public comments. Public comments continue to be taken electronically, and the period for written public comments opened 1 week ago today and closed at 8 a.m. this morning. Those comments have been forwarded to all of the members and will be attached to the minutes of today's meeting. While we encourage members of the public to view these proceedings on our live stream, this meeting is still open to the public. Do we have any members of the public who would like to comment? So our first action item is the authorization to execute a contract for rehabilitation of wheel sets and traction motor assemblies. Mr. Dalton, will you please give us a summary of this item?
Madam Chair. Okay, Madam Chair, so yes, 9A, this is authorization to execute a contract. We're seeking authorization for the CEO to execute a contract with UTCRAS LLC of Morton, Pennsylvania for the rehabilitation of wheel sets and traction motors in the amount stated in the resolution, plus a contingency for a total amount not to exceed $3,244,742. And this is for a base year plus 4 option years. We've had these contracts in place before. In fact, this is the incumbent proposer who currently has a contract, and just simply put, our wheels that are under our rail cars and our locomotives. With our locomotives, there's traction motors attached to them, and they need periodic maintenance. They're steel wheels, wear down, they come out of profile, and so we have to remove those and send it to a facility like UTCRAS to reprofile, redo wheels. And in some cases, as wheels wear down, we need new wheels pressed on axle sets. That type of work has to be done at a AAR certified shop, which we are not at this point. So that's my summary, Madam.
Questions or comments on this item? Hearing none, is there a motion and a second to approve resolution 9A?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Yeah, it's been moved by Ms. Bailey and seconded by Mr. Smith. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
The next item is a resolution to authorize the CEO to execute a contract for final design of the Broad Run expansion project.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So here to seek authorization to execute a contract with Trans Systems Corporation of Kansas City, Missouri for the base task of final design for the Broad Run expansion project in the amount stated in the resolution plus a contingency for a total amount not to exceed $8,924,802. This might be, I've got a visual here, just once again to show the multiple facets of this project, which again include relocation of a platform, expanded train service or expanded train storage, a grade separated crossing tunnel, of course, new surface parking to the north or the east of this location. So we have completed 30% design and our environmental work, so this will take us the next step towards that ultimate goal of obviously going to the construction phase. So that's my summary, Madam Chair.
Chair, I'd like to move this forward. Thank you, Ms. Lawson. Moved by Ms. Lawson, seconded by Mr. Smith. Are there any questions or comments? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Next item is a resolution authorizing the CEO to execute a contract for website management services.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're seeking authorization to execute a contract with American Eagle of Des Plaines, Illinois, for website management services in the amount stated in the resolution, plus a contingency for a total amount not to exceed $918,500 for a base year and 4 option years, with the CEO exercising those option years. This essentially, what we have solicited here is we currently have website management services under a contract. That contract's expiring. And so we need to renew that contract, but on top of that, we need a refresh, if you will, of our website. So this will be included in these services. In other words, are essentially one of the first elements of this services agreement. Again, refresh the website, and we'll bring what that potentially looks like back to the operations board, so you can have a look at it before we finalize it. And then once that's done, then the rest of the contract it's hosting the website, doing maintenance services, and then we've made some allowances in here because on occasion we have to go back to the website management services and make some changes. My example is going to be, when COVID hit, we needed to go back and make some changes to our website, set up, different elements and stuff of our website for that. So that's my summary.
The website hasn't been updated since 2014, so certainly. Is there a motion and a second to approve?
Second.
Moved by Ms. Bailey, seconded by Mr. Alcorn. Any other questions or comments on this item? Ms. Slater?
What is the, because we don't have the contract specifically, but what are we doing to control the amount of contingency? So what does the execution of that look like for that 10% contingency?
So
What would be in that? Is that for changes? What is that?
primarily for changes. So it's not, they've come to us and said, hey, we have a concept, if you will, for your redesign. And so, that contingency is probably more in line with, if we need to make changes after we've done the refresh. Or there's been, I will say, with the continuous evolution of cybersecurity issues, we've built some, that's part of the contingency as well. Like to think we're proactive, but over time things change. So that's part of it as well.
Follow-on question. Are they controlled by engineering change requests that you referred to approve the option years?
Yes.
Okay.
All those in favor, please say. Next item is a resolution to adopt rules for administering VRE's real estate relocation services.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, this is, we're asking to adopt the relocation process and procedures for addressing the administration relocation assistance program for persons impacted by acquisition of real property. As you recall, this is the second step in a 2-step process. We did bring this to you last month in an information item. And just real quick, what we're basically saying in here is that we're going to follow the federal and state laws in terms of the relocation process. What it also does is we uniquely, what you need to do, or entities need to do, is uniquely craft an appeals process, right? So we've included that in the policy as well. So What we're bringing you today it didn't change from our information item last month, so that's my summary.
Motion and a second to approve the resolution.
Madam Chair, I would like to move this.
Second.
By Ms. Franklin, seconded by Ms. Lawson. Are there questions or comments? None. All those in favor? Aye. Abstentions? Motion passes. The next item is a resolution authorizing the CEO to provide a letter of support to Spotsylvania County for a raised grant program application.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, this is simply asking for authorization to provide the letter of support as stated above. This is by request of the Spotsylvania County staff that we provide a letter of support. And specifically, this is familiar with the area and stuff in Spotsylvania County. This is a really good project. This is as it relates to the new Veterans Administration healthcare clinic site there. It does provide a feeder route for Fred down there to VRE, to those stations. So there's a lot more with the project there as well, but that's essentially we as a staff, we recommend support.
I'll give that motion to Dr. Frazier to move Frazier and seconded by Ms. Bailey. Are there any questions or comments on this item? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any abstentions? The next item is resolution recommending the commissions authorize the CEO to amend the Norfolk Southern Operating Access Agreement and amend the Amtrak Access and Storage Agreement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The recommendation is exactly what is stated. Just want to draw your attention to the fact that recently, of course, we have executed an amended, restated operating access agreement with CSX. And slightly prior to that, we executed an operating agreement with the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority. Within those two agreements, there are essentially the exhibits that sort of explain the service plans. And so this is partly just simply going back to our other two host railroads and reflecting those same exhibits in their agreements. But I did want to draw your attention to this here real quick. And I'll just stand up. I'll walk through this. But when we refer to the post-acquisition schedule, this is what we're referring to. So essentially, all we're doing right now is, or we will be doing, is implementing what we refer to as a post-acquisition schedule. And up here, also want to note where we've highlighted AQ. Those are those additional train slots that VRE received as part of this transaction. You're not approving us going and operating those train slots here, but this post-acquisition schedule does acknowledge where those train slots are at. Now I want to circle back to a question Supervisor Alcorn and others had a little bit from a near-term perspective or short-term perspective. The way this is broke down is we have our current schedule at the top and then proposed at the bottom. And you can just kind of do a quick comparison on times and stuff here. But on the Fredericksburg line, one of the, I'll just say, really great service enhancement for us, not only just from a rider's perspective, but more so from that congestion piece that we were talking about earlier. I'll draw your attention to this is a PM train. This train currently departs out of Union Station at 3:10 p.m. Within that, about a 20-minute window there are several north and southbound Amtrak trains, both on the corridor and us as well. And so, once we implement the post-acquisition schedule, you'll note that it'll come out at 2:40 PM. We actually get out in front of and I don't mean this from a disparaging standpoint, but when you're talking operations service planning, it gets us out of the way of two of our nemesis trains. Okay, these are trains that have to come off the corridor and have to come off on time or they're gonna get in our way. So this actually puts us out there sooner. With that also, this is something our riders have asked us for years, is to be able to come out before 3 o'clock and catch an earlier VRE train south. And partly the reason behind that is because train 300 comes out of Spotsylvania slightly before 5 AM, right? And it's an 8-car train and it's a limited express train. We make stops at Spotsylvania, Fredericksburg, Brook and Leland, and then we bypass Quantico, we bypass some other stations. By the time we leave Brook, that train's full. There's no seats on that train. So what this does for us, or does for our riders, is it sort of balances out their workday for them. They can get to work at 6:30 AM. They can leave at 2:30 and come catch and instead of waiting 45 minutes. So it's good for the rider, but it also helps us alleviate some congestion. I will say when we put this service plan into place, there are several of those kind of nuggets, if you will, from a congestion mitigation standpoint. I just wanted to point out, highlight that one as well. So not to belabor it, but I did want to come back and address that point from a service planning standpoint. And I will also add to what Director Mitchell said, once this is put into place, or slightly ahead of it, these committees are being stood up now, but once this is put into place, this is the schedule. These are the schedules that committee is going to be very zeroed in on and very focused on, both for the Fredericksburg and the Manassas line as well. So,
I was gonna say, and I misspoke earlier when I said the committees meet daily, it's weekly. But as I understand, they're gonna be starting up in August, I think is when they'll be
yes.
convening again.
So we'll go in accordance with this action here, we'll go update those agreements. This does have to come to the commission, so you'll see this again on September 2nd. But we're currently looking at implementation of this post Labor Day. The exact date yet to be determined, but frankly, VRE is pushing sooner rather than later to get this schedule implemented. I know, staff at VPRA and even Amtrak at this point are pushing to get this schedule put into place.
So Rich, I can't help but notice you got these, big gaps here that you filled that gap. You closed the gap on the Fredericksburg line, but not here.
This is the next step, if you will, for the Manassas line schedule. So
Yeah, but we don't have like a 2 o'clock departure at a Union Station like the Fredericksburg line.
But what we ended up with, this is what, look at, so the current, like this one here, 345, what we were being asked on the Manassas line is to get this out before 3:30. And again, that's the feedback from our riders. If we can get this out before 3:30, and that's what we did.
So our riders don't want to leave Union Station as early as 2, whatever your time was on the Fredericksburg line, right?
So the difference on the Manassas line is that where I showed the example of, there's a lot of folks on that early train on the Fredericksburg line. It's almost the opposite on the Manassas line.
Okay.
The Manassas line riders take the later AM trains in.
I think we're more nocturnal, maybe.
Who I am.
Preston, are you?
Early release.
Okay.
So again, this is just the next step. This is just the next step. It addresses,
Okay.
ridership or rider input and addresses some of this congestion mitigation. We're gonna sit here and focus on this, and if we can tune it, we'll do that. But keep in mind, once these planned infrastructure improvements are completed in phase 1, then we open up not only additional train slots, but we open up an additional opportunity to continue to. Hopefully that was helpful.
Presentation here. Questions about we're gonna do this post Labor Day, so do you have a plan to inform the riders about this? Because this is a significant, I mean, that's 650 and 7s, that's a big difference there.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So that's, we are working. Right now, what we're saying is we need 6 weeks. We need a minimum of 6 weeks. So hopefully by no later than the end of this month, all parties can confirm the start date. And that puts us, approximately, middle of September 15th or 15th-ish. So,
And so all the changes will be simultaneous with the website, and also you've got printed literature on the trains, the schedules.
yes, sir. Yeah, the most important thing is the messaging to obviously the riders, but you're right, there's a lot of that stuff behind the scenes. And keep in mind too, it's not just us that's changing, it's gonna be all the Amtrak service that intermixes with us as well. And that's the piece I didn't show you, but there should be some service enhancements or congestion mitigation in their schedules as well. In other words, get us collectively out of each other's way.
I guess following up on that, I'm just thinking about folks who maybe aren't currently riding the train because they're working remotely or they're on vacation in August and sort of getting on, they're used to taking the whichever train and all this, they're not thinking they need to check the website for any information.
Right.
How we're
So that's a great question, and we will have, it's a very large communications blast that happens at multiple levels, multiple media. And we don't do this all the time. The last time we did a service change like this was 2015. So what we're hoping and what's likely to happen, particularly riders that are not currently riding the service, that when they do, we'll have sort of coached them to check the schedules before they come back post Labor Day and, check the schedules because there's likely.
Thank you. On that note, when you do have the finalized schedules, can you push that out to the ops board so we can push it out to our?
Absolutely. Yes, we are not shy to enlist the help of the ops board and staffs and help us push messaging. Absolutely. Great.
there a motion and a second to approve the resolution?
Madam Chairman, I motion to approve.
Lamb, seconded by Ms. Bailey. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. The next item is 9G, a resolution recommending the commission's authorize the CEO to amend agreements with the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority and with CSX to include the Potomac Shore Station.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, glad to report we're finally at this point. Shore Station. The recommendation here is to amend existing agreements to add the Potomac Shore Station. And the point that we're at is and this is a collective we, because this is VRE, VPRA, DRPT, CSX, the developer. I mean, there's a big we in Prince William County, of course. So we have we've essentially locked down the footprint of this station. And I believe that was provided in your meeting materials as well, just kind of an outline of it. So I need to go into these two agreements, update their respective master lease agreements, acknowledge Potomac Shores in those agreements, and then with the idea that, and this is just the developer, we're working in conjunction with the developer, not on just design, but construction, but we're tentatively looking at starting to turn some dirt as early as November on the parking garage, and maybe within a couple of months after that on the station platform itself. So we're really excited about this. I'm getting this to you now. Of course, it has to go to the commissions in September. But it's slightly ahead of a lot of other parallel items that are going on. So again, just wanted to highlight that this is a milestone for us, a big milestone. That's my summary, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Question in a
So
second.
moved.
Second.
Some comments for the.
Sure. It was Billy, I missed who seconded it. Ms. Franklin.
Sure, just want to, sure, in conjunction with Supervisor Bailey, thank everyone for working on this. Our constituents are very antsy about kind of what are the next steps with Potomac Shores. Obviously, we've had a lot of challenges with the developments down there. So actually moving this forward is incredibly important. I'm not even sure if we can underscore that to everyone here. I mean, this is a huge step into the community finally realizing what they actually bought into. So I just want to thank you all and thank you Supervisor Bailey for creating a partnership for us to work on this. So thank you.
So Madam Chair,
Ms. Bailey.
ditto to what she said. But I, you know, this is a staple. And we really appreciate it because, you know, not to coin a phrase, but it shows movement. And we're really grateful and regionally, kudos for the region. So thank you. Yeah, for the region.
To me, it's so exciting to see transit-oriented development like this.
Yeah.
I know that, just take a moment to spotlight both the Prince William County Board currently serving and your predecessors, because I know it's hard to make those land use decisions that
You think?
bring enough density to actually support transit, but I mean, this is so exciting for the
It's
region. So
exciting.
thank you all for the leadership you've exercised and having to make some hard decisions along the way.
Any other questions or? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
You catch it.
I'm at sea.
The motion passes. The next action item is a resolution recommending the commissions authorize the CEO to execute a purchase agreement and an MOU with the Department of the Navy for property in the vicinity of the Quantico VRE station.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The recommendation is, what we're recommending is the commissions approve a purchase agreement and an MOU as stated for property in and around Quantico Station. So this item has two parts to it. It's a purchase agreement and it's an MOU. And if you don't mind, I'm going to try to do it this way. I think this is, I think most of you have sent this diagram. So for orientation purposes, the center is the Quantico Station. Purchase agreement that's referenced in this recommendation, we're talking about this parcel right there. So it's the shaded area. The commissions own this. The adjacent property is owned by Marine Corps Base or the Navy. I'll use those interchangeably. I'll probably say Navy a little bit more just because partial to the Navy. As you can see here, this strip of land here is sandwiched in between those two properties. And the Marine Corps Base has a project going on that's not shown here, but they're building a parking garage. And the limits of that project just are right up against this parcel. So just in summary, the Navy, in discussions about all these different parcels, but specifically this one, the Navy came to us and offered to purchase this parcel. Mr. McIsaac's worked with the Navy on these agreements, both the purchase agreement and the MOU. And specifically here, we did get a fair market value appraisal done on this parcel. It came in at $18,000 and the Navy's agreed to pay $18,000 for this parcel. So that's the purchase agreement. The MOU, or the Memorandum of Understanding, it addresses or the MOU is designed to identify a process moving forward from which we can finalize potentially a couple other transactions that both the Navy and VRE needs in this area. So I'll highlight one, or I'll working my way up. If you notice this triangle area here, you notice this road, this is Martin Street. It actually goes under the railroad and comes out over there. Again, this is property that the commissions own. From a security perspective and from a security profile perspective, the Navy wants to own that. Okay? Basically have that in their possession and in their control. So these conversations go back several years and stuff. So we've looked at that, but they've also come over and said, hey, but we've got this little bit of property over here. So maybe you consider in the future to expand your surface parking. If you notice, it's exactly the same size, 0.22 acres, 0.22 acres. So one of the concepts in the MOU says we could potentially just swap these parcels, swap ownership, right? Equivalent fair market value, equivalent size, and just swap those. Again, the MOU is set up to take the conversations that we previously had, put some parameters around it, put some timeline around it, and we'll come back to you, obviously, on what the solutions are here. So I wanted to address those. And then up here, there's a couple of easements. We call them easements, permanent easement, permanent easement. Those are for the current Quantico Station Improvement Project. And those are properties that the Navy owns that, in accordance with our arrangement with CSX, and the mere fact that we're going to have structures there, particularly on this section here, which will be the station platform, the elevator tower, and all that, there needs to be some setbacks, right? And so this will give the necessary setbacks. On the permanent easement over here, RW wall number 13 or retaining wall number 13, we need to do some tiebacks into their property, into the Navy's property to properly secure that wall. So we say permanent easements, it could be a fee simple exchange, it could take on some other form, but again, from the MOU perspective, or from the MOU, it's designed and the way it's written is to get us through this process so we can come to a definitive. And Madam Chair, I'll just defer to General Counsel if he has anything else to add for the benefit of this discussion.
No, I think you captured it exactly. I think we would, in the best of all worlds, we purchase deal. Yeah, we would have done it as part of one big transaction, but the Navy is just really anxious to get their project going. So that parcel that they sell or buy, they want it right away. They're literally starting to build.
So that's my summary, Madam Chair.
Moved by Ms. Bailey, seconded by Lamb. Are there any questions or comments?
Madam Chair, I'd just like to say, I really appreciate, I love win-wins. And so I appreciate the efforts and negotiations and conversations that were held to make this come to the fore. I mentioned to Mr. Dalton, I was on a tour with Quantico, and on the tour, the commanding colonel was talking about this transaction and how wonderfully it had gone through, and how wonderful he appreciated the conversations with his staff to make this happen. And so this is a win-win. So I certainly appreciate it as the supervisor for that district.
I used to ride this VRE all the time. And so my only concern, and I'm absolutely sure it'll be taken care of, is because of the impervious surfaces in that area. Whenever you have a significant amount of rain, that current pond is not. And I'm assuming that when they do the construction project of additional impervious surfaces, that's correct, that's a pond.
Yes.
So when they do that, they're going to resolve that, correct? I mean, that they have to do that.
You have to do any kind of expansion work that you do That's very, and Prince William County frankly is top notch when it comes time to review BMPs and all the associated things that you need to do. Not saying that other counties are not, but we've been dealing with Prince William County specifically most recently because of this project here, so.
It's a mess. And the last thing I was gonna say, it is a mess. The last thing I was gonna say is kind of funny. If we take that land where the abandoned trailers are, the inherent. The big cat village there, yeah. Oh, and maybe. Yeah, let's talk.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? This item is resolution 9, resolution to refer the financial and debt management principles to the commissions for approval.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just want to start off with while we get set up here. This, as you recall, the amended financial and debt management principles was discussed after the conclusion of the last operations board meeting, finance committee. So I'm sure you have heard enough of me speak today. So I'm going to toss this over to our Chief Financial Officer, Mark Schofield, and he's going to walk you through this. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Rich, and good morning, everyone. Yes, I appreciate the discussion that we had last month at the committee meeting about this topic. I really feedback. This will be an interesting discussion this time around as well. So the board is going to be asked to refer these amended principles to the commissions for their approval. As you all know, we have initiated a financial planning process for an issuance of debt that's backed by the Commuter Rail Operating Capital Fund, the CROC. That issuance is detailed in the funding agreement that was executed back in March between VRE and Commonwealth. So the first step in this process is to update those principles that were originally adopted by the commissions all the way back in 2013. Excuse me. We adopted those principles at that time with the assistance of EFM, who's our financial advisor both then and now. Having written and formally adopted principles is a best management practice to ensure both adequate liquidity for the organization and the long-term affordability of debt that we have. The principles that we adopted at that time back in 2013 were developed in consideration of the existing debt that we had then and sort of what were our options. Particularly that included debt that had been publicly sold through the BTC and from the FTA, which, as you recall, we recently refinanced through the Virginia Resources. All of those debts were and are ultimately backstopped by you all as the VRE member jurisdictions through the master agreement. However, the creation of the CROC in 2018 and the authorization for debt that is backed by the CROC warrants us revisiting these policies and doing a pretty important change. The CROC-backed debt was not contemplated in any way back in 2013, and it's going to vary pretty significantly from the existing types of debt that we have. So we have some important points up here on this slide. Say in particular, any CROC-backed debt that we issue is going to be new and totally distinct from the rest of our resources. The sort of entire legal security and credit profile of any debt that's backed by the CROC will be differ completely from our previous debt. These next 2 points are key. Only the CROC revenue will be offered as a source of repayment for that CROC-backed debt. There will not be any sort of credit backstop from you all as the member jurisdictions through the master agreement or the Commonwealth. So, given all of those changes, we needed to take a new look at the principles, modify them, add to them to essentially give us guideposts for when we do actually move ahead. So we attached the amended principles to the board item. A. So the original principles are in there in sort of regular text, and then the changes and the additions are in there as italicized text. I did note there was one small sentence in policy statement number 2 that was not italicized, that should have been. I do apologize for that. When we transmit this to the commissions, we will make sure that line. It's not a big deal. Just wanted to bring that to attention. Nearly all the policies that we had previously are still applicable to be our sort of guide on fiscal management. And they, most of them with a few tweaks, generally do also apply to any debt issue using the CROC. The real sort of important changes are the 2 new ones that we added. So policy number 14 and policy number 15, and I'll just talk about those. Policy 14 is really putting explicitly something that we were already doing previously, and that I think a lot of you will probably recognize from your local jurisdiction. So when it is in our best interest, we will refinance debt that we have. And in particular, if we are refinancing in order to get interest cost savings, the threshold that we will use is that we need to have a present value savings of at least 3% of the refunded principal. That was the guidance that we were using when we did the recent refinancing through the VRA. It just wasn't explicitly a part of principles at that time. And we actually ended up at like 9%, I think, for that one. But that's just a good threshold to say we won't look at a refinancing unless we meet that level. And I think that's a level that's usually typical for local jurisdictions. And then policy 15, again, really goes into some of the specific guideposts that we're going to use as we do the financial planning for this debt issuance. And I'll highlight 4 of them here. One is that we will target a debt service coverage in the range of 1.6 times to 2 times. So that is the ratio then of how much revenue do we have coming in total from the CROC each year as compared to how much debt service do we have. So if we had a coverage of 1, that would mean we were using all of our revenue coming in to go entirely to debt service. If we had a coverage of 2, that would mean we would have twice as much revenue coming in each year as we then have committed going out to debt service. So we're saying that we want to have a target in the range of 1.6 to 2. We feel that that is appropriate financially. The next 2 bullets are have to do with reserves that we will establish as a part of the debt issuance. One is that we will establish and maintain a debt service reserve. That's going to be required by the bondholders. That is essentially a pot of money that we should never touch. We would only touch that money if something terribly wrong happened. What that will ultimately, assuming that everything goes as it should, that money will just sit there, and when we get to the end of the debt term, 25 years from now or whatever, we would use that money to make the last debt service. We will also then maintain a working capital reserve. That's not necessarily going to be required by the bondholders, but it's the kind of thing that we would want to bring to the market to improve our credit. And so what that would be is a fund equal to, say, 2 to 3 months worth of CROC revenue, which we would build up over the period of about 1.5 years. And that would be in the case of, let's say, we get our CROC money from the gas tax collections, and then it gets transmitted to us by DMV. There's usually about a 2-month lag between the collections in any month and the date that we get it. If something happened at DMV, they had a problem with their systems, there was a delay in them transmitting the money to us, we could access this working capital reserve in order to make the payments that we needed to. And then once DMV caught up, we could put the money back in. Again, it's intended if something happens and things go wrong, but not like an existential type of crisis, just more like working sort of small term issues. We would go to the market telling them that we have this reserve in order to be able to improve our. And then the last point there is we will strive to achieve an investment grade credit rating and an A category rating. This was something that we discussed at the committee last month. A revenue-backed bond like this is not going to achieve the sort of AAA ratings that you all may be used to in your local jurisdictions, but we believe that if it's structured correctly, that we can at least achieve an A category rating. If it looks like that is not going to be possible, if it looks like we might come in triple B or something, which would still be investment grade, we would bring that back to the board and to the commissions to discuss, the reasons why that is and whether we think that we should proceed or not. So So those are really the highlights. These principles, if they are, referred by you and then referred to the commissions and approved by the commissions, they will sort of guide then the overall credit and financial analysis that we're going to do for the debt issuance. As we discussed at the committee, this is really going to be sort of an iterative process. We're looking at the key legal and credit features, working with Steve, working with our bond counsel, looking at, what does our credit estimate tell us versus what are the ratings agencies likely looking for? All of those things. At the end of that process, we will have identified what we think is the right way to move ahead. We will come back to the board and to the commissions with that proposal. We expect that to be in the fall of this year. And then again, with all of those approvals in place, we would move it into phase 2, which would be the actual implementation of the transaction. That?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to ask, understanding all of the upgrades that's necessary for the principals, the last, first of all, was this from lessons learned from COVID? Upgrades or is it pertaining to that mostly just for protection, or
It's not so
is it
much.
necessary?
Sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
Not so much from COVID, no. It's more just, it's been 8 years or so since we did the principles. And again, doing a debt issuance backed by the jurisdictions was something that was contemplated previously. Now doing a debt issuance that's backed by a revenue source like the gas taxes coming into this IROC was not something that was contemplated. And so we need some sort of policy level guideposts to inform us as we move through the transaction.
Okay, and then my second question, Madam Chair, is for the to achieve the A category credit rating, is that the highest, or what's the highest? Is it?
Well, the highest would be a AAA.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah, we will not achieve that. But again, we do want to achieve investment grade credit rating. So we will, and strive is sort of a term of art there. That's what we hope to achieve. If we think that if we can't achieve that for reasons of the market or reasons of how, gas tax backed issuance is viewed, but we can get a, triple B, and that's still an investment grade rating. We would come back to you all and describe, what is the reason for this? What is the market telling us? And how do we think that we need to proceed?
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, just first off, the principles are great. And I like the fact that we're not committing all our money to any one thing and everything else like that. But there are a few issues. So I'll have no issue with moving this forward and taking it to commissions. The only thing that I brought up in the meeting is kind of trying to wrap my head around, and hopefully I'm here for another 2 years and I'm gone. You guys got to deal with this.
I think so.
You are talking about bonding 25 years out on gas tax revenue. Anybody want to guess what gas tax revenue is going to be like in 25 years? By our agreement, now remember what happened with the CROC funding, the state took $15 million of our jurisdictional gas tax revenue and put it in there. We are obligated to move that money into this, and thus that is, quote, a stable source of revenue when you're looking at this. But for jurisdictions like Fredericksburg, who doesn't get a lot of money out of this in the first place, as the gas tax drops, we're still obligated to do our portion to make that $15 million. So it's negatively impacting us moving forward. And that we have to have a discussion another day, but we are making great strides in transportation right now, especially on the transit and train side of the house. Yet we're still dependent on a source of revenue that's going away. And we've yet to have a serious conversation of how are we going to carry these projects forward when the revenue sources we're looking on. And no doubt we will do as we always do, we'll jury rig something to get us from year to year. And that has been the worst thing we've ever done, because there's been, every time we've tried to have a serious conversation in Richmond about transportation funding, it gets, oh, it's not as bad as we thought, we'll carry that over to the next session, and then the next session, and then the next session. So I have a real problem with the overall principle of where we're going. The other aspect of this, and I asked at the meeting, we are covered legally from any obligation if this goes south. I can tell you, and I think all of us have IDAs or EDAs, and it's the same thing. Oh, you're not legally obligated. If they screw up and whatever, then you're out of it. And we've been there, and here's the response. Well, you're not legally obligated, but if you don't, this reflects on your jurisdiction or future loans. And I think that needs to be made clear unless that is not correct. But I've sat in on 2 occasions where it goes, city, you're not legally obligated, you're covered. But if this goes south, it's coming back on you in some form or fashion. And in those cases, what does the city do? Well, I guess we're going to have to get the extra money in so we don't have the negative impacts in the future. That's either our legal counsel or anybody else wants to say otherwise.
Well, I mean, I know I would say that, the scenario you're describing is more typically with a moral, some sort of kind of play, which is not a legally binding obligation, but it definitely reflects on the creditworthiness of the locality. This situation is very, very different. I mean, there's no way the locality is able in fact, will expressly state that the localities are not making any pledge whatsoever, moral or otherwise, towards this revenue source. I think if anything, what you're describing is a situation where if there's truly a default in the payments, then it'll reflect on your creditworthiness in the future. And in this case, it's going to reflect on the Commonwealth because it's the Commonwealth's revenue source. It's not a local or regional revenue source. It's truly a statewide one. So we'd be looking to the state to bail. The state is going to be worried about its future.
Steve, just to make the point on that. And how has the state on occasions dealt with issues of shortfalls in funding? They created the CROC and used our money to do it. They went to NBTC and said, Metro, we're going to take care of the Metro problem using local dollars. That's, again, where I'm, okay. I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Good morning. Good to see you in person.
Yes.
So I was trying to recall, did you as an ops board discuss or implement any type of policy? I'm guessing no to the policy of CROC dedicated strictly to capital projects. So we can apply it for operating as well.
We can, absolutely. So the way that the legislation was written was very broad. It can be used for the operations of VRE. It can be used cash basis for capital projects, and it can also be used as the match for state and federal grants.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm almost certain we did adopt policies for use of the CROC as part of our budget process. After
We did, right. We did adopt policies, I'm saying, but we're not limited. We're not limited to capital only. We can use them for.
I thought we agreed that we would prioritize. It was sort of an effort to say we didn't intend to supplant existing commitments. It was a way, frankly, of showing sort of good faith to the Commonwealth about how we intended to use it. I thought we would prioritize expansion projects, et cetera.
I'm sorry, maybe I misunderstood Ms. Lawson's question, but yes, in the near term, we have said our first 3 years commitment of the CROC was to the LaFont project and the Creative project. We hadn't committed anything else after that in anticipation of this deal. And so yes, for the next, assuming the deal goes through as it's structured in the agreement, for the next 10 years, all of our CROC funds will be committed to capital, either through debt service or through pay-go payments to the Commonwealth. But absolutely, our anticipation after that 10 years is over, after the Long Bridge has opened, hopefully, is that we will be using the CROC for operations to support the new trains that are available once that added capacity is in place. So maybe that's a more sort of nuanced thing. Legally, we can use it for anything that we want.
Right.
What we've stated is over this sort of next 10-year period, yes, it will be capital, but then it's probably going to be for operations after that.
So if I can segue into the reserve, will debt service reserve fund, will that be earmarked for each project? And about what percentage are you looking at?
So the debt service reserve fund, which probably, this isn't yet, but probably will come out of the proceeds of the debt issuance. We will take what will likely be about equal to 1 year's worth of debt service and put that in a fund that is not touchable unless we're heading towards a default.
Right.
It is there as protection for the bondholders in case things go sideways. So we should, unless things really go wrong, we should never touch them.
Right, but then you mentioned something about how, you know, as we get closer to the maturity of.
Oh, yes. Once we get to the end of the debt and we're ready to make our 30th year payment, we can then draw on that debt service reserve fund to make that very last payment, and then the bond is done. But we wouldn't touch it until the very end.
Right. We never want to touch our
No,
reserves.
no. Whereas, and again, the other reserve, the working capital, is just if there are issues, near-term issues with the cash flow, something we could draw on that, make the payments, and then backfill. That's just to sort of help if you have sort of near-term cash flow issues.
Thank you.
Sure.
Well, I think one thing that we hadn't talked about at the finance committee that sort of mulling since is, of course, as our council often reminds us, we aren't a legal entity at all. We're merely the child to parent commissions. And so I'm just, we hadn't really discussed this to what extent these principles will be carried out, and the debt, in fact, will be managed by the team here at VRE in collaboration with the two parent commissions. You know, is there anything we should be thinking about? I know at NVTC, right, we're starting to leverage some of our sources, or consider leveraging some of our sources separately, because they have separate, they're backed by separate programs, they're entirely separate. There's just any interactions with what the commissions do that we should be aware of?
Sure. So I'll say a couple of things. One is, if you'll recall, soon after the creation of the CROC, we did execute an MOU between the two commissions that sort of laid out the responsibilities of each of the commissions. And because this is a state revenue source, ultimately, BTC, as it does, you know, always takes the lead on the management of all of VRE's state money as compared to PRTC taking the lead on the federal money. So NVTC is the holder of the account that we have right now that all of the CROC monies come into. And yes, ultimately, when this is issued, as you said, VRE is not a legal entity, so it will be done in the name of NVTC. There will certainly be concurrence by PRTC, but really NVTC will be sort of the primary actor there. Luckily, Steve is also the counsel for NVTC, so we have that at least. And you know, we'll be looping in Scott and Kate there all throughout the process.
So moved, Madam Chair.
Say aye. That, we can turn it over to.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. 10A is the standard monthly spending authority report. It does have a couple items on here, task orders, some purchase orders. Glad to speak specifically to any of these. If you have any questions at all, don't, I'll move to 10B. Hearing none, 10B. Madam Chair, I will once again defer to our Chief Financial Officer, Mark Schofield, as he is going to review the key budget issue, 2023 key budget issues, also part of the Finance Committee discussion at the end of last month. And one thing, just want to make sure that this is intended to enlist your feedback, comments, so staff can, over the course of the next 2 months, finalize what would be a draft budget for FY23 that we would bring back to you at the September meeting. So with that, Mr. Schofield, thank you.
Thank you, Rich, and good morning again. Rich stole my initial note, which was just to remind you of what the calendar is here for the budget. Hard to believe that we're already back on the next year's budget process. So we do key issues in July with the board. We come back in September with a preliminary budget. We spend October and November digging into details there, modifying our assumptions. And then we come back to the operations board in December with the recommended budget, which then hopefully the board will refer to the commissions for their approval in January. The FY23 budget process is going to continue to be very deeply impacted by the uncertainty around the recovery from the pandemic. I think there's uncertainty both at sort of the macro level on how will population and job growth change both in the nation and in the region, how will inflation trend, and then also at the micro level, how are people's commuting patterns going to change? What are the telework options is going to be for federal government employees and contractors, and then how is that going to translate into free ridership? So as with last year's budget, the 22 budget, we do expect it to be challenging to try to forecast ridership and revenue. And so we do expect significant amendments in December to the 22 budget, to the budget for the year that we're in now, and a decent amount of uncertainty as we go through the process, and we will just try to do the best that we can there as things become clear. So we had identified 5 different key issues with respect to the 23 budget. Issue number 1 is the use of our pandemic relief funding. So I'll just move to this next table, which is also in the board item. So this is the status of our funding from the 3 relief acts that over the past 18 months. So through the end of FY21, we expect to have drawn approximately $32 million in relief funds, at this point entirely out of the CARES Act, and entirely to backfill our lost passenger revenue. The FY22 budget, the year that we just started and which we recently amended, we anticipate using approximately $54 million worth of relief money, again, on a combination of backfilling lost passenger revenue to the jurisdictions for their subsidy, and the non-reimbursement of track access fees with the Commonwealth. And then after accounting, as we have on here, for the required set aside for safety and security, which we're currently planning to use on expanding and improving our security camera network, and then strategic investments using the relief money, we do still anticipate having about $70 million left over in 2023 and the year beyond that. So again, I think the pandemic is a challenge and there's a lot of uncertainty, but I think we have the resources, at least in the near term, available to handle. Ridership, again, as I said, is challenge number 2. As Rich indicated earlier in his comments, we do expect to see a pop in ridership come Labor Day, given the discussions that we've had with DOT and DOD and a lot of the other agencies where our riders work. But there is still significant uncertainty about sort of what the new normal is going to end up looking like. As you know, we already have relatively higher ridership in the middle of the week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and lower on Mondays and Fridays. I think it's very possible that increased work from home and telework will sort of accentuate that pattern. And so these changes, not just in sort of the overall level of ridership, but how riders ride and how often they ride, will show up in our ridership numbers and also in like what kind of tickets will riders be choosing to use. Will they continue to use monthly tickets? Will they change over to 10 ride tickets? We're just going to have to watch how all of that evolves, how that plays out into the average fare and ultimately into the revenue on the bottom line. We are already seeing in May and June more of a return to normal as ridership is coming back. People are beginning to sort of go back to more normal ticket purchasing behavior. And again, just as a point to use for your reference, we often talk about average daily ridership. We've pre-pandemic, we were averaging about 19,000 riders a day. each of those 1,000, each 1,000 of those riders generates about $2 million over the course of the year. It's just a number to keep in mind as we. The third issue then is one that in more normal times is probably number one on the list, which is fares and jurisdictional contribution. So I'm sure you all have heard maybe from your local bus operators, things like that. A lot of agencies across the region are looking at both permanent changes to fares and also sort of temporary and promotional changes to fares, in response to sort of reduce ridership levels. We're going to continue to look at options. How can we get our riders to come back? But I do think ultimately, as you, fare revenue is critical to the sustainability of the area. Fare revenue more than 50% of the operating budget. You know, that's been a requirement in the pre-pandemic times, and I don't think we're going to ultimately give up on that source of support. So I would say that the initial view of staff, at least coming into the preliminary budget in September, is to hold fares steady where they are. 22, hold them there going into 23. Given, however, this sort of overall uncertainty of ridership, it's likely, as we did for 22, that we will have to request that the board waive that 50% recovery requirement in the budget. I don't think that we're going to get back to that point yet, but again, we will have to see. Then on the subsidies side of things, using those pandemic relief funds, we were able to provide relief to the local jurisdiction contribution for this year, for two. However, our sense, at least initially, is that the local revenue picture in many of the jurisdictions is not as dire as was originally forecast, and does continue to improve. And so that kind of level of relief may not be necessary again in 23, and that positioning our relief more towards the backfill of lost passenger revenue is probably the right way to go. So again, our initial view coming into the preliminary budget and open for discussion is that we will probably return to a normal level of subsidy, and that about $18 million across all 9 of the jurisdictions. So those are the 3 big issues sort of related to ridership and all that. Issue number 4, I think, is a much more exciting one, and again, towards the top of the list, and that's TRV. So as Rich talked about quite a bit, our first opportunity to increase our service is coming next year through that post-acquisition plan service, which gives us one more additional round trip on each of the lines. That is not just a question of the finance staff and where do we get the money to do it. The staff across the organization are working on that in terms of storage, security, communications, staffing. Adding trains like that is kind of an all hands on deck. The issue is we don't know exactly what the timing is going to be for that. We're not going to put our date down, and then if ridership doesn't justify it, well, we're going to move ahead anyway. There will be some flexibility there, bringing those trains on at the right time. And my job with the budget is to provide a budget that allows for that kind of flexibility, that has the resources there when the time is right to bring the trains on. So that'll be a big part of the 23 budget. And then the last issue, which is one that happens all the time, is changes to the CIP. As you know, we have a very robust CIP. We have a lot of projects, 3 big ones now in active construction. I don't think we're going to be adding a lot of new projects to the CIP in this year's round, but I think there are going to be a lot of changes and updates to the existing projects, either to their schedule or their scope or their cost. I do think the pandemic has sort of an impact here in terms of the cost. We've all been looking at the inflation numbers, both sort of overall and then for specific things like lumber and steel and concrete. So our project managers are going through now, looking at their projects, penciling out the costs and seeing how that inflation is potentially changing things. So we'll be incorporating all of that again also into the new version of the budget. So we'll be bringing that information to you over the next couple months. There's always a lot of other little things, but I think, given the situation that we're in now, these are really the big ones. These are the strategic ones that we're going to be trying to deal with. With that,
Yeah, I think we should have a more robust conversation about the jurisdictional subsidy. From a local government perspective, it is true our revenues are looking good. It's also true that our ridership is down. So, if you look at the number of riders that we're getting per dollar that we're putting against a local jurisdiction, I think that in itself calls for consideration of using some of the federal money, particularly when we're in pretty good shape in terms of the federal money that we receive. So I think we should be talking.
This is maybe more of a long-term issue, but certainly to the section on ridership and fares and jurisdictional subsidy. I mean, I think we need to have some serious consideration of our ridership. It's hard to predict what's going to happen in terms of telework, both in the federal government sector. But I doubt any one of us believes we're going to return to 19 or 20,000 riders a day, setting aside service expansion. With the current ridership profile, where we have predominantly, not entirely, but predominantly a white collar, group of riders, GS-12s that live in Burke, right? I mean, kind of normal. Some of them are going to be working from home 2 days a week, 3 days a week, 5 days a week. So do we need to look at specific outreach to a different group of riders, people who can't work at home, service industry, cleaning the buildings that the GS are working in? That probably means fares, that means specific outreach. I think it's consistent with their equity focus also. But 10 years from now, I think our ridership is going to need to probably look different from a socioeconomic perspective than it does now if we're going to get where we want to go. So I don't know that can be resolved in the context of the FY20 budget, but I think we need to have a serious process to look at that.
Madam Chair, thank you. I would certainly agree and endorse what Mr. Walkinshaw is saying, because I think the workforce is going to look different for no other reason than from a social economic standpoint, but also from a standpoint, people are going to be teleworking. So, I just think that the whole profile is going to be different. So I would certainly entertain more discussion about that.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Pursuant to the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, that the VRE Operations Board convene a closed meeting of discussing one matter involving the acquisition of real property for public purposes, including rail operations and rail equipment storage, where discussion and the public would adversely affect the bargaining position and negotiating strategy of the commissioners. The investment of public funds related to the provision of the commuter rail service where competition or bargaining is involved, where if made public initially, the financial investment of the commission would be adversely affected, and consultation with legal counsel concerning the terms of an agreement for the investment of such.
Ms. Lawson, seconded by Ms. Bailey. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
So, Madam Chair, let's give it a few moments, have staff, with the exception of some selected staff.
I know.
Jump down here.
No, actually, Madam Chair, we are live streaming.
That the VRE Operations Board certifies it to the best of each member's knowledge and with no individual member dissenting. Just concluded closed session, only public business matters lawfully exempted requirements. Freedom of Information Act were discussed, and only such public business matters as were identified in the motion by which the closed session was convened, heard, discussed, considered.
All those in favor, say aye. With that, we'll move to operations board members time. Any board members have announcements to make at this time?
Madam Chair, I don't know if I've ever done this before, but Leslie, I just want to thank you for all the admin support that you give us and our office staff, like. You're a rock star.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Lawson. Any other announcements? I will just remind folks there is a legislative committee meeting following this, and anyone is welcome to attend that. With that, is there a motion and a second to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Meeting is adjourned. I just noticed earlier, I was like, wait, which spot is that? Like, too many tracks, but.
No, I don't. I love it.
Oh, okay, actually, you can sign that. What do you guys think? Just like we're saying.
Yeah, that's a nice conversation.
Yeah, but I talk regularly. He's on Twitter more than.
It has now gone.
So it wasn't like, I mean, you know, obviously not gonna be as crazy, but like, right, so it wasn't nuclear war. So not even, yeah, like, rewind. Yeah, like, that does not get any. At least it's good for us. So that, I guess that's also, yeah, keep that.
We'll now move into our legislative committee. Then I'll turn it over to kind of go through our legislative priorities. I'll run through this very quickly. It should be passed around and then we'll go into a summary and kind of what the next steps are and then discussion. So if you have in front of you, some of the things that we'll be discussing include state funding, VRPA, ETA funding, Virginia Transit Association, electronic communication, meetings held through electronic means, transportation authorities, our relationships with those, as well as COVID, which is obviously still a huge concern. Grant programs from the federal government that we can apply for, Department of Transportation rulemaking, surface transportation reauthorization before Congress, liability insurance, and surface transportation authority. So I'll turn it over now to go over those items, and then perhaps we can go into discussion and hopefully agreement upon this list, or maybe some additions depending on what some of you are hearing in your region. So I'll turn it over now.
Good morning. My name is Joe Swartz. I'm the Chief of Staff at VRE. We'll remind everybody that we are still live streaming and all of the mics are still on. So again, sidebar conversation. This is the first meeting of the Legislative Committee. It is really just to go over that. Sort of threw some things on paper. I've heard some comments over the last couple of meetings about things that should be on. This is an opportunity to look at what we have. Anything else we want to add, have that discussion now. The schedule here is because the commissions did not delegate this, the operator take this to the commissions to get passed. And that normally happens December, that's when they pass there. So working back from there, again, we need to pass it as a recommendation here in take it. So we will have one more committee meeting after the September meeting to sort of finalize everything that's on here, get it forward from there. So again, anything we discuss today, we can get on here. If over the course of the next 2 months, anything comes up, please feel free to discuss consultants. If that's way forward or whatever. Speaking of which, so I have our two consultant teams. We have a consultant team that works down in Richmond and that works on Alex. Basically just give you some color commentary on what's going on down in Richmond right now, what we should expect out of the next legislative session.
My name is Alex Thorpe. I work for a firm in Richmond called Commonwealth Strategy Group. Okay, so I just want to remind everyone that our agenda is typically pretty broad in nature, and that it's designed to give us ultimate flexibility in Richmond, since this is one item that this board, this commission needs to get approval from. On. It's difficult to change that if we need to in the middle of session. So we try to keep things broad. So if an issue pops up, we can fit it into one of the existing categories and adapt and address it as needed. That being said, the draft that Joe shared with you does appear to be pretty comprehensive. We worked with him on putting it together. Have a special session coming up in a few weeks that will address mostly the federal stimulus and relief money. We don't anticipate that any of the governor's surplus that he announced this week will be spent during that time. However, it's always subject to change. It's likely that 2.3 billion, I think it was, will get rolled into the governor's budget that he's putting together this fall. So we'll probably see his intention with that December budget. Happy to take any questions. I can just briefly kind of walk through some of these items. Obviously, we prioritizing following money committee action and looking at state funding. We've had really nice years in terms of funding for transit and passenger rail with the creation of the new authority. Closely monitoring all the activities there, and we'll be following along various budget proposals associated with that. Continue to advocate for additional funding. So work closely with the Transit Association to make sure our line in the system where we can. I would say one issue that's kind of outside the lane of transit, but one that we focused on in the last years is electronic meetings. This commission expressed a willingness to add more flexibility in that space. So we've been engaged in that. We anticipate that General Assembly will take up that issue in the 2022 session. And so we'll be continuing to work with this commission Assembly to make sure that
And just a little bit more about the logistics on this. So, of course, the legislative session is, from sometime in January or March. While that's going on, if something comes up that is a little outside of this, I will be coming to chair and to the committee and giving an update of what's going on and do I need direction on, do we want to pursue this? Do we not want to pursue this? Do we want to block something that somebody else is going to do? So during that period, for me, it's just saying, okay, this is going on. Can somebody please tell me where we want to go with this? And then as far as the special session goes, as Alex said, I don't think there's going to be a whole lot during the special session in August that we're going to need to work. Where I think we'll get a little more active in fall when they are creating the next 2-year budget. Again, there is a budget surplus. It is very likely that some of that of course, we want to be at the table. There's always going to be the question of, is there something VRE wants to go, or is there something that in combination with DRP? And we can, well, actually, do we have any questions? Do we have anything we want to, anybody was thinking about adding on here? I think coming out of the meeting, what I heard was discussion of a voting board member that is specific or permission or something.
And actually, if I may offer, it may be a good idea, I guess, Mr. Kelly and Katie are not here, but it may be good to follow up also separately with them to kind of get more, particularly with Mr. Kelly, more of an idea of what that looks like, because what I heard was additional authority from VRE in terms of a voice, and some of that may already be reflected in some of the things that we're looking to pursue. But if this is not to kind of what he is comfortable with, then maybe get a better sense of what that looks like. And of course, we can kind of discuss that here as well, but.
I mean, County too. I mean, our position is that there should be an MPTC and or MPTC/TC voting member on RA. I think, frankly, that's probably unrealistic. I don't suspect that's going to happen. But I do think there's value in our codified agenda. Our hope and part of our advocacy should be, at minimum, continuing practice that's been established, which, if I understand it correctly, and Kate, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that NVTC created a list of potential appointees. PRTC created a list and the governor selected from that list.
No, that was just part of the information that was shared. The governor selected who they wanted to. So it was just a part of the information gathering. Yeah, so there was not.
So even worse than I thought.
Yeah,
okay.
sorry. I mean, I just want to say for what it is. I mean, obviously, I think as you had heard, we have obviously a very strong relationship. And work very closely with Mitchell to provide that information.
Sure.
But it then went to a different entity apart from the whole transportation secretariat. And so those selections were then kind of went into a black box, right? I mean, but obviously we were, in both instances, we were fortunate to get one, in our case, one of the names, I think in PRTC's case, a couple of the names in there. But other than them geographically living in the district, there is not a.
I mean, maybe if we want to keep it broad, and I agree, it makes sense to talk to Mr. Kelly or others who have an interest in this. This document would come back to the full operations board or directly to the commission? Yeah, to the full, so maybe we can have that conversation then, but my recommendation would be under VP, under Rail Authority that we add, which is advocate for NVTC and PRTC consultation any new or additional appointees to the, I mean, privately, I would be stronger than consultation, but maybe that's kind of where we are right now. And
just to be clear, I mean, because PRTC, like, as mentioned, we got 3 appointees on there, so that's kind of, I mean, it wasn't a black box, yes, but it sounds like you're saying being more deliberate and intentional in asking PRTC, you know, who like on this authority, or is that what you're saying?
yeah, I would say NVTC and PRTC.
right.
Speaking for NVTC, I'm glad that PRTC got 3 of their recommendations. On the other hand, that NVTC jurisdictions maybe should have more representation than we do currently, not to against each other, but I think there should be more robust consultation with both. I think it's probably makes sense from VRE's perspective.
Madam Chairman, I wanted to add to that. Stafford County has had several conversations at the board level specifically about that membership and not having that voting member. So we too are very interested in seeing this being added to our legislation.
That's right.
I can add my 2 cents. I think your initial reaction is probably the better strategy here to say, we want the voting board member, we want these people, you know, we want it set up like this. Start with that position, and if for some negotiation as you're getting policy written.
I'm okay with that. I'm just trying to be sensitive. I know that there is an existing relationship and that's maybe going away from some perspectives, and I don't want to blow that up, but that would be my instinct also, but that's up to the committee.
Yeah, I mean, shoot for
Exactly.
the most and then negotiate down.
So I'm happy to come up with some sort of draft language.
But that would require legislation to be. The other language that I threw out there wouldn't, could just be at the governor's prerogative to, or whoever's leading the black box, their prerogative to be consultative than they have, but.
Like I said, I'll put some language together, and then that's a discussion we can have.
Before we move to the federal level, any more questions or additions on state priorities from anybody?
It's not an addition, I just actually, the electronic communication means I think this language is sort of what we had last year, and it was targeted towards individual electronic participation. And I think next year we'll hopefully be looking at flexibility for the entire body to meet electronically outside of an emergency, which again, this morning we saw why that is important for our committees to be able to meet, not directly, to have flexibility to meet at times that are not directly before or after meetings. And so I think the language that says better accommodate the needs of their actually could be tweaked to something that says something like that allows the board to be more efficient, effective, and responsive while also remaining open and transparent to the public.
You'll get with her on that specific language. Anything else on the state priorities? Yep.
The only other thing that kind of was on mind was we had an NBTC, our last meeting, from Director Mitchell and others about the low fare, no fare pilot program or grant program that, so would VRE be eligible for that as it's currently constituted?
I believe so.
Okay, so, and so maybe it's a continued investment in kind of low fare, no fare pilot program. As we're maybe thinking about what our ridership is long-term. Human beings.
And so I guess, I mean, you have those tweaks and you'll come back with some language. Talk about those again and agree. So you want to now talk about some of the federal priorities?
Yep. So federal stuff, of course, goes on continually. We have a lot of stuff going on up there right now. Patient reauthorization bill, 5-year, moving its way through. As tell you that as of right now, numbers look pretty good for transit and for railroads in general. So there's nothing up about in particular as far as numbers. We will keep an eye. Generally speaking, we can go up supporting this currently. But I will let them speak.
Thank you very much, Chair Franklin, members of the committee. Thank you for providing me this opportunity to discuss the agenda. So VRE can continue to be advantaged by favorable legislation and regulation fueling a lot of your capital projects and ensuring safe and efficient operations. My name is Bennett Resnick. I serve as counsel and director of government relations for Carl Infrastructure, working on VRE's behalf in DC. In collaboration with Chief of Staff Joe Swartz, I believe we've once again put together a comprehensive federal agenda that appropriately addresses VRE's funding, legislation, and regulation priorities. At the top of the agenda, you'll see that we address COVID relief funding. It's our objective to work with the congressional delegation and alongside our association and coalition partners like APTA and the Commuter Rail Coalition to protect the unobligated and the unspent COVID relief funding necessary for community operations, VRE services, especially given the more protracted recovery that transportation is experiencing. We have a fairly heightened level of awareness with respect to how Congress might pay for the pending infrastructure bill. It's currently being negotiated, and with repurposing COVID relief as an eligible source to advance this effort, we want to make sure and do all that we can to protect the critical funding that we need. With respect to federal grant programs, as you likely are aware, we recently submitted a planning grant under the US DOT's RAISE grant program for LaFont Station and Fourth Track Improvement Project. We'll continue to work towards submitting projects like these that do meet the requirements of these new grant programs and in the best suit for these opportunities, support VRE's partners as well in their efforts on these programs as appropriate. On US DOT rulemaking, we'll continue to monitor all the advance notices and propose rulemakings or guidance and submit comments needed to protect VRE's interests and provide our perspective to those crafting new or amended policy, especially considering the new administration's perspectives and priorities. As for surface transportation reauthorization, I know you're all aware of the ongoing negotiations in Congress with respect to a number of legislative priorities, including the Senate's bipartisan infrastructure bill, budget reconciliation, the annual transportation appropriations, and of course the reauthorization of the surface transportation bill, which is commonly referred to as the BEST Act, which is the House-passed reauthorization bill. So we will continue to engage with our delegation, with APTA and the Commuter Rail Coalition, to ensure that the bill provides strong benefits to commuter rail entities and does not purposely or inadvertently disadvantage commuter rail participation in grant programs or negatively impact from these amended policies. An issue that's been a priority over the years, and has certainly ramped up as we've gotten new language for legislation from APTA, is the rail passenger liability insurance, which remains on the agenda for 2022. We're working in conjunction with APTA and the Rail Coalition to advance legislation in the reauthorization bill that would offer insurance by way of a revolving fund housed at DOT to commuter rail agencies. And that would provide coverage of between 50 million and DOT's rail passenger liability cap, which is currently 323 million, providing payment for losses. There is a sense of Congress provision in the Invest Act, which we're very pleased is in there. It's a placeholder for this legislative proposal that APTA put together. And the sense of Congress states that Congress should address the capacity and cost issues associated with commuter rail liability insurance market. Consider establishing a commuter rail insurance program within DOT. So we are working with Senators King and Warner and other members of the commuter rail coalition still to see that a similar provision, if not the actual legislative language, is included in the Senate version. Lastly, the federal agenda addresses the Surface Transportation Port Authority, preserving STB's jurisdiction over VRE. We're monitoring this closely as legal actions are taking place in other parts of the country. Educate the delegation and relevant committees of jurisdiction on this issue, and as necessary, submit written testimony or public comments to regulatory bodies to advocate for preserving STB jurisdiction over VRE. While that covers the draft 2022 agenda before you today, if I may, I just want to take a moment to address the pending legislation before Congress. The Senate at this moment is well into negotiations on its bipartisan infrastructure framework, attempting to put together legislative language that could advance before August recess. That being said, the issue is surprisingly complicated by parallel efforts to pass a $3.5 trillion budget reconciliation bill, as well as regular annual appropriations. The reauthorization bill could be packaged together with the infrastructure bill, as has been encouraged by some members and noted by the lead author on the House side, House T&I, Chair Fazio. The timing of all this is not well known at the moment. The Senate could pass a bill that would be conferenced or reconciled with the House over the summer and into September, though possibly history is not on our side when it comes to passing reauthorization on time, which would be before the current FAST Act extension expires at the end of September. So we may see a short-term continuation to provide additional time for Congress to resolve the last minute issues. With that, please let me know what questions you may have or to discussing any of these points or other points you may have.
So I'll just start. So basically, the current package, everything is still up in the air.
Essentially, yes. Yeah.
And then more specifically with STB, so there's not a particular ask here, just basically monitoring kind of what they do and just educating them about kind of what VRE is doing and how their rulemaking will impact us on certain issues.
Correct, and as well as the delegation. Yes.
Any other questions or comments or additions?
Madam Chairman, I wanted to talk about the, I'm pretty sure you guys are aware because of American sent out a notice to all of us or someone about the BDAC legislation that was going on for broadband. And if you look at what's going on in the federal government, a lot of money is being pushed that way. My concern is there's like several different points. One is that with BDAC and being forced down upon us, it looks like the way it's currently legislated or drafts are that they would force railroads to be able to provide facilities, and facilities is a big word, not like a building, but like a pole or whatever, or broadband in the future without any compensation. And I know we spent billions of dollars on infrastructure, and so maybe trillions, but on infrastructure. So it only makes sense to me that we ensure that the language allows us to locally negotiate those and be able to keep that within us, so that way we can get some compensation for that. And related to that is we know telecoms make, their profit margins are a lot higher than ours. Ours are intentionally lower, so we can provide, the best service. So I want to make sure that the federal government doesn't come down on us and say, hey, we have to give that. All right. Now, the last point I want to say is, yeah, I'm really kind of in favor, but I want to make sure that we get the compensation. The other part of it, when I don't know where it fits in, as I mentioned earlier about easements, is being able to clear things up to make it easier. So if we're in a situation, I'll specifically bring down Brook. No, we don't have. So if that's at the Brook Road VRE station, there's very little cell phone service. There's nothing there. And there's an opportunity for us with federal grant money to bring in into those areas. So it's like, yeah, there's like several different tentacles that go into this, but I just want to make sure at the legislative level, that's not taken away.
Can we just add a section maybe on broadband and then maybe add more specifically kind of the concerns, but suggestions?
I haven't seen an update since 2020 from BDAC. Maybe you guys have, so.
We can, defer to Joe, but, we can draft language for your review.
Or questions, suggestions?
We step back for a moment. I started talking about this liability insurance issue here, and I'm not sure how familiar. So as you can imagine, carry a lot of forward insurance. So every year we have to go out to the market. Large. It's so large that we have to go to there's a smaller. And this is also gets contractually obligated in our southern CSX certain set by the federal government. It's basically say you have to have that same level. So over the last decade, that market has been relatively soft. We've been paying. It's not cheap, but we haven't been full. That market has hardened considerably overall. It's nothing to do with VRE. Both because of PTC and others have become safer over. The insurance companies and the insurance that we're getting all intermingled with all of the other things that are going on. Forest fires out west, all these other things that causing the insurance companies to make huge payouts. Nuclear payouts that juries are giving to people. Hundreds of millions of dollars in payouts that basically weren't expected. And the way they make that money back up is charging us more money. So 2 years ago, we saw a slight increase starting. But again, we knew it was a soft market, so a little correction was expected. Last year, it almost doubled. The bigger problem there, this is industry-wide, was we weren't sure we were going to be able to place all of our insurance. And like I said, we have a contractual obligation, and if we couldn't get to that level of insurance, we might not be able to run our service. So many of the insurance companies said, yeah, you know what, I'm out of it. Chance that I'm gonna have to. So the industry has come together to propose. There were a lot of iterations in this, but at the end of the day, the proposal here is to have the federal government. We would still need to get a certain level of insurance from them. This isn't completely taking this out of. But the bigger backstop here, the insurance, 200 insurance, done to the federal. So that's what's going right now. This is an industry-wide issue. This is being forwarded by Administration Association and so we're supporting them in to
Chair, can I just add one point there? Just the way that this is being proposed now, that would be an alternative for us. We could still go to the market, and test the market and see if we could get, favorable premiums moving forward. This is as Joe indicated, this is a backstop in case we elect not to do that or can't do that. Then there's this backstop.
I absolutely support that. I think it's really interesting because we've spent billions of dollars on PPC. Our accident rate across the nation has dropped so dramatically that it seems curious to me that the insurance rates would go up. So
That is exactly our case. You made us spend a whole lot more money safer. That's insurance market is relatively new. And guess what's going to happen. I suppose somebody does, but I don't. So having not have to do if it's not best alternative would be.
It's important that you flag that. This is also happening in other industries outside of transportation as well. It's a big issue in Congress. Being mindful of time, are there any other questions, additions, comments? Federal side, anything else on the state side? So we'll take those recommendations, fine tune them, bring them back in September.
Yeah, I'll circulate something. I'll wait until September. Back from your vacation, then I did focus back into work, but sometime in September I will send that out to everybody and then yes, discussion.
That's great. And then anything else, Mr. McIsaac or anybody else? Yeah. Yes.
Just quickly, thank you for preparing us for this session and just the timeline. What do we expect? And this really did, so thank you.
Guys, nothing else?
No, nothing.
All right. Madam Chair, anything else? Dalton? We're good?
Good to go, Madam Chair.
Okay, with that, we'll see you all in September.
Do we need